Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to this Guardian live event with Yotam Ottolenghi and Ixta Belfrage about their new book Flavour, which is very exciting. We're going to be talking for the next hour and just let you know how it's going to divide. So for the first 30 minutes, I'm going to be talking to those guys about the book, how they put it together, what you can find in it. And I can say it is a really brilliant book. I read it yesterday. I cooked two things from it yesterday. Super easy, incredibly delicious. And then for the final 30 minutes, we're going to take some questions from you, some that have been sent in already, and some hopefully that you're going to submit, while we're talking. If you do that, can you also put where you're writing from? Because that'd be fun. I hope we've got people from all over the world. That'd be really nice to know where the questions come from. So the Q&A function for the questions is on your screen to the right of the window. You can choose to be anonymous or use your name. Please keep your questions as short as possible, just so that we can get through as many as possible. Yotam and Ixta, do we have you here? Oh, there we are. Okay, I'm just going to introduce you guys, even though I don't think you need any introduction. And just to say that you guys are back in the Ottolenghi test kitchen now, which is why you're sitting together in a non-socially distanced way. I wish that I could be there too, but I'm not. I'm in my non-test kitchen behind. So Yotam Ottolenghi has been a regular columnist for The Guardian for 13 years, going from New Vegetarian and Weekend magazine, fondly remembered, to his now opening slot in Feast. He is the restaurateur and chef patron of several delis, as well as the Nopi and Roby restaurant in London. Yotam has written several award-winning recipe books, including Simple, Plenty, and plenty more. Ixta Belfrage began her formal culinary career at Ottolenghi's Nopi restaurant before moving to the test kitchen, where she has worked for Yotam Ottolenghi for 4 years. She also makes regular guest chef appearances in some of London's top restaurants. Together, they are the authors of this amazing book, which is subject to our discussion today. I'm going to kick off straight with a question about the title, which I found intriguing because you guys are known for big flavors in, not shying away from flavor. So surely all of your books about flavor. Why is this one specifically called Flavor?
I don't have a very good answer, but I can think of a couple of good answers. I think it's a kind of almost a reaction to Simple, which was the previous book. Which was kind of I thought the mission of that book, and we talked about it together, Felicity, I think, before, it was to kind of prove that you can cook Ottolenghi and not, make a total mess of your kitchen and go shopping for half a day and then, cook for a few hours. So it was all about proving that it's possible to create a certain level of complexity of flavor, even with fewer steps and fewer ingredients. And it's almost like Ixta and I wanted to re-own the space almost of flavor and kind of show that complexity of flavor can be done. This book is not particularly complicated, but what it is that we try to kind of pinpoint or show how flavor is created, or how with vegetables, which is the general word for things that grow in the ground, you can really create an intensity of flavor by layering. Just like the layers of the onion on the cover, and we focus on that. So there's big chapter openers before every one of the big sections in the book, and in each of them we talk about how you create flavor, how you enhance flavor in vegetables, how you really push it to the limit. So, like you said, there's always been a lot of flavor there. I've never been shy on flavor, and Ixta definitely isn't shy with her flavors. But this is just the way the focus is shifting to what actually happens in the kitchen when you cook, when you create flavor with vegetables.
Yeah, because when I was reading it yesterday, it's more, there are loads of recipes, but it's also more text heavy in the sense that it's divided into chapters and there's a few pages of sort of process in there and explanation. It's a little bit more sort of scientific than maybe some of your other books. Is that something that you've sort of become more interested in, or what was the thinking behind including that?
It was really about, because this is the third in a kind of the vegetable installment, which had plenty and plenty more in our flavor. I really wanted to kind of to give a bit of extra kind of an extra bit of knowledge to the reader. So there is, the kind of standard 100+ recipes that are exciting and new in many ways. And I'd love for us to be able to talk about this evening, how different they are from the previous books. But it was really important also for me to focus or to show what is actually happening. It is about that to a certain degree, to give that kind of extra.
You were talking about how this was a very vegetable focused book, and actually it's got a lot of vegan recipes in there as well, and a lot that can be made vegan. In the introduction, you admit, Yotam, to a small niggling doubt about how many more ways there are to roast a cauliflower or fry an aubergine. What changed your mind and made me think that there's another exciting book? What was the inspiration?
Well, I think this just happens every day, and I don't know if everybody knows that, watches at the moment, but I work in a test kitchen, so there's a group of us, normally 2 or 3 people in a room, testing and tasting food, and there's always brilliant ideas that come out from the people that work in my test kitchen. And I just thought, there really is so many more things coming up. And I think I use the metaphor of music because there's that limited number of notes, but there's just so many iterations possible. And I have to give Ixta a lot of credit in this context, because Ixta cooks I'd say quite differently from me. On the one hand, we're both kind of into our big flavors, but because of her personal background, her history that she might talk about in a few minutes, but her Mexican influences, Brazilian, some Italian ones, there was a lot of new ideas that came out from that. So that cauliflower that we use as a metaphor so often, because it was such an unloved vegetable for such a long time, the one at the very bottom of the heap that's been climbing and climbing and climbing. And I really did think, like, how many more things can you do with a cauliflower? And then comes Ixta, and she makes this incredible chili butter, roasting the cauliflower with fresh chilies, with harissa, with flake chilies, and all of a sudden, here we go. There's another great way with the old cauliflower. So it really is the vegetables and the people, and in this particular book, Ixta, that have convinced me that there's so many more ways to the old veggies.
I feel like the one that really caught my eye, just because I often see it reduced and unloved in the garage opposite my house, and I always buy it, and just make it into soup, is the swede. Like, you've got a few recipes for swede, which is just really exciting. Like, is it swede steaks? Is that one of the things? And I was just like, I want to go and find a reduced swede and do something magical with it. Are there vegetables that you have seen in a new light since you guys have been working together?
Yeah, I mean, I think swede is definitely one of them. So in the book, we've got the swede steaks, which are covered in this sort of fenugreek curried marinade, and they roast for a really long time until they're really soft in the inside and are really crispy and caramelized on the outside. And then we've got swede gnocchi, which we steam and then make into like really pillowy gnocchi with the miso butter. So that swede is definitely one of them. I think kohlrabi is another one that really opened our eyes during the book. I think most of us, or certainly myself and Yotam, only really ever ate kohlrabi in its raw form. And, it's crunchy and it's watery and it's great for salads. And that's sort of all I knew. And I think you have told me before about the way that Germans eat it, and they cook it and they have it with sour cream and stuff. I personally had never cooked it. So actually in the book, we've got 2 recipes with raw kohlrabi and 2 recipes where we roast it. And it becomes a totally different vegetable when you roast it. It sort of loses all of its water and becomes this like soft, brown, caramelized version of itself, which is, you'd never know it was the same vegetable.
Yeah, totally. And I think this is the one thing that, if you're asking Felicity about discovering new things, I think often people associate my cooking with introducing people to new ingredients, which evidently happens. But often it's the old ingredients, the familiar ingredient, like the swedes and the turnips and the kohlrabis and cauliflowers of this world, that actually get a different look at through different ingredients, through different techniques. And I love the fact that I almost gave up on cooking kohlrabi for a while because I tried a few times. The water level in vegetables sometimes just doesn't work, and then you need to kind of get a lot of heat there and do quick cooking, etc. But then it did work, and Ixta found a couple of really interesting ways to cook with kohlrabi, and still does. And I just find it's really it's mind-boggling how much you can do with a vegetable, and that kind of water content in a veggie compared to a piece of meat is what earned vegetables their reputation, with a not so positive reputation, of past, because it just takes a little bit more work and a bit more knowledge to know what to do with them. But once you know, it's actually fantastic.
And when you're talking about the turnip, I love the idea of replacing the nut roast with your turnip, like Chinese sort of influenced, inspired turnip cakes, which is really exciting. And I love that there are lots of different. It did feel to me, reading this book, that Ixta, you have brought a lot of different influences, and also is it your colleague Noor in the test kitchen with the black lines and things. It did feel there wasn't quite so much sort of tahini in this book, I suppose. I mean, there is a bit of tahini, I believe, but it's not quite as sort of central. It just felt really, I'm quite interested to know what you feel that Ixta you've sort of brought to the book. Is it the chilies or the?
Well, it's actually quite funny about the classic sort of ingredients that we know as sort of Ottolenghi ingredients, the sort of za'atar and tahini, and I'm sort of less used to cooking with those, but of course, having worked with Yotam for 4 years, I do use them. But actually, when we were making Flavour, sort of towards the end of the recipe production process, we realized, I was like, hang on a sec, there's hardly any recipes with za'atar or tahini, or rose harissa. So it was actually a good few weeks where we're like, we just have to come up with some tahini recipes, some rose harissa recipes, and actually some of those turned into like our favorite. So like the za'atar cacio e pepe, which we just needed a recipe with za'atar in it, and then that's what came out of it. And another recipe that I really love is the spicy roast potatoes, which would have like a sweet soy tahini sauce. That's kind of like another way of using tahini, I guess. Most people use it in a Middle Eastern context, but if you use it in a similar way that Japanese people would use sesame paste, so in that recipe we mix it with soy sauce and mirin and rice vinegar, and that creates something totally different. But yeah, I think in a lot of the recipes we do blend cultures and ingredients, because it's really when it comes down to it, it's about the flavor, and it's about
and that's kind of one of the things that I love to have noticed in hindsight about this book, is all the moments where the kind of our personal trajectories kind of collide. So the za'atar cacio e pepe with the za'atar thrown in, which sounds like to someone who hasn't tried the recipe, so is that really necessary? Like, you take an Italian classic and you throw za'atar in, does that really kind of constitute a real contribution to the culinary world? But actually it really does, because all of a sudden it just gives it a totally different angle to look through, and I tried a few times, made it a few times, and I thought, like, that is a really, really good thing. Or those roasted potatoes with a tahini soy dressing, again, it's like, or there's recipes for hummus which involved a lot of infused oils, like Ixta loves to do to the infused oil with aromatics, dried chili or fresh chili, citrus and spices and herbs. And so all of a sudden that hummus, which is so much part of my heritage and culture and growing up through the Palestinian and Jewish perspective, gets a whole new perspective when Ixta throws a whole confit garlic in, or cascabel chilies, Mexican chilies. So I love to kind of go through the book and find those moments where it works really well together.
Yeah, I think in the recipe for the caponata with the silken tofu, which seemed like a really again, you're taking a real classic and you are just putting your own stamp on it. And you say that there's a little bit of suspicion these days about the idea of fusion cooking, but then I've heard you somewhere else used to say that that actually, if you've got a classic recipe, why not go to the source for that recipe? If you're not going to do anything different, is there any point? And I love that idea of, actually that there's so much value in fusion and sort of thinking outside the box. I was wondering how many, like, how do you come up with flavor combinations like that? Like, how does it start? What's the process in the test kitchen?
I mean, it's really, I have to say, it's really different with every recipe. So sometimes we're working on a column and it's like, for example, a courgette column, and we need to come up with 3 courgette recipes. And, you know, we might want to try 3 different ways of using a courgette, like grilling it raw or mashing it, whatever. And then there's as many ways to cook a courgette as there are ways to sort of cut it and just prepare it.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we like to do a game, but you know, when you just open the fridge at the end of the week and see what's left, and maybe you've got 3 or 4 ingredients, and you just say, okay, I'm going to make a recipe from that. So, for example, the kimchi and Gruyere rice fritters, and that's how they came about, because we had an open jar of kimchi, we had some Gruyere cheese, we had some leftover rice, and that's how that recipe came about. So there's no one way to create a recipe in my mind.
Totally. And you know, like sometimes it's about like a visual cue or some little element that you see. Like I love the when we talked before about this striking onion petal image of the charred onions in reduced pomegranate juice that is based on a dish that is served in Testi, and it's a Turkish restaurant in North London. And sometimes, you know, when Ixta goes out to eat and she comes back and says, I've had this thing and it's just so good and I need to recreate it, it often starts with the wanting to almost replicate something that you had before, but you never quite replicate it, because through the process of testing you want to do something else, and some ideas come up, and it just changes. And or the turnip cake that we talked about is the kind of something we both love when we go and have dim sum, you know, that either turnip cake, the sliced one that you get, or the stir fry kind of Singaporean style. But it's always so un-vegetarian, you know, there's pork there and dried shrimps and, you know, things that were just not for this book. And we thought, like, how could we turn this into something which would fit here and still fit the bill? So we added chestnuts and sesame, and we create these kind of maple infused clusters that are a bit like that pork sausage that you get in
chewy
Chinese,
bits of shiitake
and chewy bits of shiitake.
Yeah, it almost, I mean, it's not the real thing, but it's not it's better, I think. Well, it's not better, that's not what I meant to say, but it's just as good, I think.
It's good. It's a different category.
That's what I meant to say. It's definitely not better. I take that back.
Yeah, I love the fact that you reference. I mean, I love it mostly because I know and love some of these restaurants that you mention in the book. And I was wondering, did you guys find it hard during lockdown not to be able to go out and sort of, you know, find inspiration from other cooks?
I think for me, mostly just I missed going out to eat, you know, in these places that, you know, that are mentioned through the book, especially, you know, Chinese food or Turkish food, you know, these things that are just so well prepared in the restaurants that we're so fortunate to have as Londoners, you know, because London just has so many of them, or Vietnamese, you know, that you have all these kind of places that you go to that you know so well, and it's such a little special moment when you go out and because you don't do it so often, but we've had this kind of 6 months of having none, and then going to Chinese restaurant the first time we both talked about it. It's like you feel really deprived.
Yotam, when he came back, he was like, I have to go to Shan Impression, or I have to go to, so yeah, the first place he went was Shan Biang Biang Noodles.
Yeah, the Biang Biang Noodles.
Yeah. But that's one of the things I missed the most as well. Just really good Chinese food.
Is there a cuisine or a sort of area that either of you would like to explore more? Because certainly, actually, I found in lockdown reading more cookery books, I've realised, you know, enormous gaps in my own knowledge that I'd like to fill in. Is there sort of an area or a region that you feel that you'd like to learn more about, sort of for inspiration?
I'd definitely like to get more delve deeper into Indonesian cooking and the kind of cooking that comes from all the various islands, because I think it can change quite a lot. Yotam went to Bali last year, and when he came back, we tried to recreate some of the dishes that he had. And then during lockdown, I got a really beautiful book from Lara Lee, a beautiful Indonesian book, and there's various recipes from, I mean, there's so many different places there, so many different islands and countries, and I've never been there, and I always love the food when I either try to cook it from a recipe or replicate it. So I definitely want to
Yeah,
get more into that.
for me, I've never been to Mexico, and all my knowledge of Mexican food comes through being in California, which is not quite the same thing, or the being in Ixta's presence in the test kitchen, and her you have a bit of Mexican background, and I really want to travel and really understand the kind of, again, the regional aspects of Mexican cooking, and just try it in situ. It's always the best when you have it in the country of origin. It's
Absolutely.
never quite as good.
Okay, I'm going to go on to questions, other people's questions now, if that's okay, because I could carry on talking to you for the entire hour, and I guess that's not what everyone wants. Surprisingly, I might be wrong. I would like to ask, Matthew DeRay asked, what was the biggest surprise you both discovered when creating Flavour? The book.
The big discovery when creating Flavour. Wow. I think.
Oh, actually, no.
Do you have one? Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, when we were first making the book and we had no idea what the book was going to be called, we were calling it, just as a nickname, we were calling it P3 because it was plenty more, and this was sort of plenty 3. And then Tara, our colleague, who wrote the beautiful chapter introduction, so thank you so much for that, she, like halfway through a doctor's appointment, had this light bulb moment and realized that the book could actually be divided into 3 Ps, and that's how processed, pairing, and produce came about. And it came about because we just nicknamed the book P3. So yeah, that was a kind of a funny discovery.
It was because we couldn't quite figure out what is it that actually happens, like why, because we started giving chapters names that didn't quite meet. So we would have one chapter heading would be about browning, and another one would be charring, and the other one would be about nuts and seeds. And these are just very different category. One is a process, one is an ingredient. We couldn't figure out what's going on. Then Tara said, hey guys, actually you've got 3 types of chapters. You've got the pairing, the produce, and
they just happen to be 3 Ps.
And they happen to be 3 Ps. And that was, wow, yeah, that is very clever. And the whole structure of the book came out of that moment.
Yeah.
Well done, Tara.
Yeah.
Molly from Hackney would like to know, Ixta, what was the biggest learning curve in your career so far?
Biggest learning curve in my career so far? Well, I'd say it's sort of two points in a row. So before I started working at Noppy, I had never worked in the industry before. I always cooked, but I had never worked in the industry before, and I thought it would be a great idea to have my own little catering company and market stall, and doing it by myself, and it was not a good idea. It was awful. And I mean, it went well, but it was just incredibly hard, and that was the reason I decided, like, I actually have to go and get some experience because this is mental. And then I fired off about 20 CVs one night, and Noppy called me the next morning, and they needed someone, and I didn't think anyone was ever going to give me a chance because I didn't have any restaurant experience. But yeah, and so I worked at Noppy for 9 months, and that was an incredible learning curve because, like I said, I'd never worked in a proper kitchen before. And then obviously straight after that I moved to the test kitchen, and the last 4 years have been the most incredible learning curve working with this man here who's an incredible teacher. So those are the curves.
And Riaz Rizvi says, what event from your childhood most influenced your love of cooking? That's to both of you guys.
Oh wow, events from my childhood. I think, well, for me, it's a kind of an assortment of events because I've had parents that loved cooking, and a grandmother that did incredible Italian food. And I remember walking into her kitchen, into my grandmother's kitchen, and they were immigrants from Italy to Israel in the 50s, and then when I was old enough to realize what was going on, it was these ingredients that they had, like, family sending over from Italy, the olive oil and the cheese, the parmesan and anchovies, and things that you just couldn't get of that quality. And I remember walking in this kitchen and really understanding the kind of the value of those ingredients has definitely kind of shaped the way I experience food. Yeah, so those kind of moments in kitchens were extremely valuable.
Mm.
Ixta, there's something that stands out? Sounds like you had a very interesting
Yeah, I
childhood.
think one of my earliest memories when I was I grew up we moved to Italy when I was about 2.5, and I guess when I first had memories, I met a girl called Giuditta, and her granddad was an incredible pasta maker, and he used to make all the pasta for his son's restaurant. We lived in Tuscany, and whenever I went to her house, Fiduccio, her granddad, used to make pasta in the laundry room. So in the basement, he had this laundry room that had loads of washing machines and dryers and laundry hanging up everywhere. And then he would make all this pasta and have pasta hanging out. And I remember I always wanted to go and sit in the laundry room and watch him make pasta. So the smell of like a freshly laundered clothes and pasta is that's one of them. There's loads. I think I've thought about food since I had conscious thought. So that's one of them.
You were destined. A few questions. A few people have asked, and I'm going to take Sue Picture's question, but there's a few on this note. She said, I'm married to a complete carnivore and we're parents to a vegetarian. Which vegetarian dish from the book will satisfy them both without the former thinking he hasn't really eaten?
Oh, that's a good question. Meatball korma, maybe?
Tofu meatball korma, yeah. I think that would be super satisfying. So essentially, it looks like meatballs and it smells like meatballs in korma sauce, but it isn't. And there's mushrooms there,
mushrooms and tofu,
and it's very, it's that word that we hate saying, but we know what we mean by umami. It's very umami. And it's super satisfying. I would also probably add the rolled aubergine with the paneer.
Oh yeah, stuffed aubergine rolls. Yeah,
which is really, really delicious. Again, similar in a way that it's a familiar curry flavor and it's very satisfying. If you have that with the rice, I don't think anybody will feel at all shortchanged if they're meat eaters and haven't had, they'll get their fill.
Yeah, I mean, actually, there's loads of sort of dishes that could fill you up as much as meat does. We've got the celeriac steaks with Café de Paris sauce and the turnip cake as well. Yeah. I think, there's plenty in there.
Joanne Finson asks, what have you cooked most during lockdown and what did you miss eating most? I feel like Chinese might have been covered the last half of the question. What did you cook most?
So I was cooking mostly for my children, so it was in kind of a very kind of child-friendly lockdown. One of the things that I cooked a lot are vegetable fritters, which is a great way. I think a lot of parents have kind of caught up on this idea that if you create a fritter, you can load it with vegetables and you can get your kids to eat a lot of vegetables. So I made a lot of cauliflower fritters, corn fritters, celeriac fritters, and I think the one things that I found through the kind of my fritter experience is that with kids, obviously if it's fried, it's more attractive, but then you can start kind of introducing things slowly and add more herbs, add more complexity, and I have to say my boys are not the most adventurous eaters, but now through their fritter experiences through lockdown, they eat coriander and ginger and curry flavor, spiced food, and there's no problem at all. So that was my mostly, that I cooked a lot of those. Yeah.
How about you, Ixta? What were you cooking?
I think the things I cooked most in general were like pastes and sauces and things that could be used in lots of contexts. So there's a sambal recipe that was the base of a nasi goreng in Yotam's Guardian column. And I cooked that all the time and used it in fried rice or would fry it down into a paste and use it as the base of a curry. Numbing oil, I made that a lot. So that's actually a sub recipe from one of the recipes in the book. It's the cabbage with ginger cream and numbing oil. And I made that about 10 times and put it over everything. And so like condiments and flavor bombs, which actually is a very, one of our favorite parts of the book but I don't know if you're going to talk about that.
The F-bomb. I like the idea the book might be called the F-bomb.
F-bombs. So what we thought about when we finished doing the book, we realized that a lot of the recipes have amazing takeouts that you can kind of use in future recipes, and those are sauces and marinades and things that happen while you're cooking. And we started kind of pouring them or adding them to other things, for our staff lunch or whatever it is we were doing. And we realized that actually that it's really important to draw attention to things, like the 3 garlic butter or the numbing oil that Ixta mentioned, or pickled onions, or things that don't take a lot of work, or you put in the work once and then you can double the recipe or triple the recipe, and you get it sitting on the shelf waiting for your next meal. And I think many of us love the idea of just steaming rice and pouring something that you've made earlier, and I certainly am one of these people. And I think so we came up with this idea, and I think it's really useful.
Yeah, I think it's really. I think the test of how useful it was the way I was cooking over lockdown is that I would just make a bunch of pastes and oils and salsas, and that would make everything else so much more interesting if I didn't have too much time to cook. So that's a really important section to draw your attention to.
Yeah, totally.
Trace from Seattle in the USA says, can you talk about the cover design decision? And I'm just going to hold it up again for people that haven't seen it. So I don't think the book's been sent out yet.
Yeah. So first of all, there's an American cover and there's a UK cover, and there are different covers.
Okay.
Which is always the case with, I think in most books you get that thing. The markets are quite different. So the American cover has a dish or a preparation of a dish from the book with grapes and shallots and chestnuts that are later getting some roasted Brussels sprouts. And that's very colorful, but quite a little bit darker. And then for the UK cover, we've got this onion. So essentially what it was is we tried to convey that kind of layering of flavor, which we talk about so much in the book. How do you layer flavors? How do you create with vegetables the idea that it's not about one thing, but it's about echoes. You can have like 3 types of chili, and each one does something slightly different. One adds freshness and zing, and another one adds kind of sweet depth, and the third one adds a lot of heat. So the idea that you create those layers of flavor is kind of encapsulated by the layers of the amazing Technicolor onion.
One more time, in case you didn't see it. Beautiful onion.
It's technical.
Scott from Glasgow would like to know, Yotam, do you listen to music while you cook? If so, what do you listen to?
I like to listen to music while I cook. I've got kind of an eclectic. I like listening to David Bowie. I like to listen to The National. I like quite rocky, You still want to play your music?
I generally now listen to sort of like funk and jazz when I'm cooking. But I've always had album on rotation, which is Glenn Miller's greatest hits, which I love to cook to. But yeah, those would be.
Filled out. Catherine Sharp Alchiche, I really apologise for my pronunciation of your name, Catherine. Was it a conscious decision to work with so many talented women for your books, Yotam? Do you consider the Ottolenghi Empire to be a woman-friendly environment?
Good question.
No, it wasn't a conscious decision. But I think one of the things that comes out in the test kitchen is that we are. It's a kitchen that has been designed or conceived as a place for home cooks, domestic cooks. And one of the things that it was very clear to me when we started doing recipe books, that these are not going to be chefy books. Those are going to be books that are really suitable for people to cook at home. And I find that it's just a very broad generalization, but the chefs that have been trained as chef, the majority of which are men, have a completely different way of cooking. and the women in the test kitchen have had a kind of normally a slightly different trajectory to the world of cooking, slightly maybe not as traditional, a bit like myself, not just going doing the culinary training and then working the way up in restaurants, and Ixta is one of them. And yeah, so that's probably the reason why there is a lot of women. But yeah, but it was never a decision. People come in, and there are many very talented men working in the Ottolenghi Empire as well.
Sally from Bristol says, in the test kitchen, what is the approximate ratio of successes to failures, or is everything always delicious?
Well, it's I wouldn't say there's ever any failures in the sense that we never sort of make something and think, well, let's just toss that. But we do retest things as many times as it takes to get them to be perfect. So, a recipe that turns out really well the first time, we might only test one more time. And if it's not great, nothing's ever awful. But generally speaking, nothing's ever too bad. But it might take longer to get it to be perfect. So, the average of the amount of times we cook a recipe, I'd say, is maybe 4 or 5. But there have been some recipes that take a lot longer than that.
And also some recipes kind of transform themselves from one thing into another thing.
Yeah,
so
totally.
Through the process, you start with a certain idea, and it just doesn't really work. So you don't want to ditch the idea, because there's always a grain of a future idea. So, even if you can't make it whole together, you can turn it into something that is a bit less structured, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so especially with baking and cakes, often the idea doesn't really work physically. Things don't stack up as nicely as you think they were, etc. So it just turns into a tray bake, or these kind of things that happen quite often. Transformation through ideas.
Do you still? I remember you mentioning, I think when we were talking about Simple, that you had a recipe tester in Wales that tested everything on her family. I just love that idea. Everything that's in your, in the works.
Yeah, Claudine Bolstridge, who's been testing my recipes since the beginning, she used to live in London and helped me with recipe testing, and then she moved to Wales and got married, moved to Wales, had kids, and we were just thinking of a way for us to carry on working together, and I just said to her, look, it's really useful to have someone testing a recipe at home. So after a recipe had gone through all the stages of testing in the test kitchen, for me it's really important that someone with a completely clear eye, goes shopping in different environments, cooks it, and gets reactions from their family and tells us what the reactions were. And Claudine has that, so she's got her kids, her husband, her in-laws live around the corner, and
lots of lucky neighbors as well.
Lucky neighbors, and she just gives us a kind of a much more broad impression of what the recipes are like. Also, how good it was the next day. A much more of a kind of a general look, not as into the specifics as we are in the test kitchen. And I think it's fair to assume she likes her job.
I'd like the job. From Edie in Stowe, Vermont, how have your palates changed over time through your career in food and your travels?
It's a really good question. For me, I think one of the things that has happened over time is that I've changed a little bit, but I think I learned how to focus. I think it's someone who is surrounded by food, you often forget to what eating is all about. So I think I've sinned in the past by maybe piling a few too many things in one plate, and it takes quite a lot of courage to kind of, and also a certain degree of maturity to kind of at some point say, okay, actually less is more in the cooking sense. So that I think these days I would prefer things that are slightly more pared down and less fireworks. I still want my big flavors, but I think that I'm a bit more thoughtful in the way I put things together.
Ixta, have you had any revelations?
I'm actually stumped by this question. Yeah, I can't think of anything that I've always pretty much liked everything.
Do you have any? Someone else has asked if there's any flavours. Yin Lee has asked, are there any flavours either of you just to test even after repeated attempts? And I've admitted before Yotam that I don't like flat leaf parsley, and I'm glad that you're at a distance, but I just can't.
Wow.
I can't do it. I know, I'm ashamed of it. I just can't. Sorry.
I don't love sort of very strong aniseedy flavours like arak and and licorice. I really don't like licorice. But that's pretty much that's pretty much it. Quite boring, sorry.
Yeah. I don't have anything. I mean, there's some things that are incredibly pungent, like durian or really, really, really mature cheese that I think that's just one step too far. But generally speaking, I'll have just a small amount of those things just to make sure that I've tested this. But I actually really eat kind of everything. Yeah.
Well, I'm publicly shamed. Lisa asks, what's the first recipe that we must cook from Flavour?
Oh, gosh.
The first recipe that you must cook from Flavour.
Changes every day.
It really does. Well, I think
it's a good time for the tomato and plum salad. I can say from personal experience, it's a really good time. The tomato and plum salad.
Yeah,
the tomato and plum salad. Yeah, that's it's got seaweed salt and sesame salt that goes on top, which is really special, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I can give you a few. So I think the one that's probably closest to my heart is the spicy mushroom lasagna, which is really complex and hearty, and I don't want to use the word meaty, but it is meaty. And yeah, it's got lots of black pepper and chili and loads of different fresh and dried mushrooms, and I think it's just really wonderful celebration of mushrooms. I think that's a real winner. The onions that you spoke about, the charred onions with the pomegranate sauce, which are inspired by the kind of onions you get with kebabs in kebab shops. Those are really special and really simple as well. Just charred onions, reduced pomegranate juice, eartha chili chives.
Can I butt in? There's actually a delicious flan. There's desserts in the book as well, and there's an ancho chili flan.
Yeah, that's really
which is also happens also to be one of the easiest recipes in the book to make, and there is ancho chili in it, and you know it's got a caramel on the bottom, like a creme caramel, but. And what is so beautiful about it is that the ancho just brings all these kind of attributes of chili that are not heat. I mean, there is a tiny bit of heat there, but even children, I think, could eat that because the ancho is so mild. But it's got that depth and sweetness, and it's something that I love a creme caramel, and that's kind of similar, but it's just so bloody delicious.
And so easy. It all just goes in the blender at the same time. You have to make a caramel on the side, but everything else just goes in the blender, blitz it, pour it in the oven.
Yeah, and also the mafalda pasta with the butternut and warm yogurt. I love warm yogurt. She asked about one dish, and we're kind of on number 7 already.
I could go on.
They're all things that I've got bookmarked. Kristen Belsize Park says, "What are your all-time favourite cookbooks that you'd recommend for others?" That's always a hard question.
I think my most thumbed cookbook is probably Heartwood. Which is the book of Heartwood Restaurant, which is in the Yucatan in Mexico. I think it's one of the most beautiful books ever, and some incredible recipes in there and incredible ideas of actually a lot of the ideas for like charring and oils and butters and things like that. I was definitely inspired by. I love it, and also it's just full of pictures of the Yucatan, like the rainforest and the sea, and
it's a beautiful book.
Really
for me, I love for the writing. I think Nigella's How to Eat is just such a brilliant book, and that ease which you can write or she can write is just something so admirable. Plus, really lovely recipes and that are fundamentals to the home. I just think it's just such a beautiful package, and that's one that I go to when I want to kind of be inspired about writing in a non kind of not too labored way about food and still feel real and genuine.
Two good choice. I don't have the Heartwood one actually. I'm going to have to seek it out. That sounds good. I obviously do have Nigella. Someone anonymous, so maybe angling for a favour, says, "What happens to all the food you produce in the test kitchen?"
Well, it gets sort of what isn't eaten. We all eat probably far too much in the test kitchen, but what doesn't get eaten, we sort of split into takeaway boxes and people take it home. Sometimes if we've made too many desserts, it's quite hard to shift things. But Yotam takes a little bit.
I take most of it home. I can always get my kids to eat most of these things, and if not, then someone else that comes over. But the one thing that I want to say about the leftovers that's quite interesting is that sometimes, you were asked if things were like huge successes or not, like whether we've got failures in the test kitchen. And one of the funny things is that you kind of can spot a failure if nobody took it home. It's like we might have been really excited about it, or at least kind of gave it a pass mark, and then that's the last plastic container that's sitting there and nobody goes to get it, and then often sometimes this is confirmed by Claudine saying, that was just not my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah, because someone else has asked, their expert has asked, how do you know and all agree that a recipe is final? And I guess there is quite a lot of back and forth about whether someone thinks it needs something more, or that must be a hard call if everything starts off as quite good.
Well, it's not. It doesn't start off as quite good, actually. I think it starts off as the beginning of something, and then there is a way forward. It's not very often, I think, that you or Noor create something that we taste and say, "Oh, that's just perfect now." It's more what's going to happen.
Yeah, but I think
we're
we're pretty much all on the same wavelength. We've never I don't think we've ever been around a dish and someone thinks this is perfect, and the other two are like, "No, it needs that." I mean, we're pretty much.
It's something really interesting. Like often I've been asked about because my books are often collaborations. So we use bespoke together with Tara and with Helen and with Sammy in the past. And do you ever argue? And I just find it really quite amazing how little we disagree. I think it's kind of amazing and I think it says something not about the people that work in this kitchen, but more about human palate. I just find that when you hit the spot, everybody knows that it's right somehow.
It's hard to argue on something.
There's very little arguments when unless someone is maybe being malicious. I think that.
But that's never happened.
No, that doesn't happen. But no, that idea that we really get to kind of agree is quite an insight.
What Marco asks, what season and seasonal vegetable do you most look forward to?
Oh, season and seasonal vegetables. So Ixta mentioned courgette earlier. So courgettes are a seasonal favorite for me. It always reminds me of my summer in Greece, because not this year, but normally I go to Greece in the summer with my family on holiday, and we go to an island, and normally there's just like maybe 4 or 5 vegetables that are there all the time, and it's courgettes, tomatoes, red onions, cucumbers, aubergines, and kind of that's almost it, and I love those courgettes. They're just so good, and there's just, like Ixta said, there's so much you can do with it. I mean, you can grill them, and we do barbecues, and they're just so good with yogurt sauces or things of that. So you can steam them. There's one place on the island that does them steamed with like paper thinly sliced raw garlic, like new seasoned garlic and oregano and local olive oil, and it's just that. It's like steamed courgettes, the olive oil and the raw garlic, and it's just so good. And that's those courgettes are my favorite.
God, now I want to eat those courgettes. Anya asked, did either of you make banana bread during lockdown? And if so, what did you add to it to make it special? Because I can't believe you just made straight banana bread. If you even made banana bread.
I have to admit that I did not make banana bread, and I've also never made sourdough. I feel so bad about it. I know. I'm not really never made sourdough. I never really make bread apart from flat bread, and I didn't make banana bread, so that's a disappointing answer. Sorry.
I have to say that I did make banana bread, but I really don't think it was so unusual. It had pecans and banana. No, sorry. But the one thing that I will say about the banana bread is that is what I love to do is brush it in oil and char grill it, and the sweetness of it's just so good. Charring banana bread.
So once it's baked.
Once it's baked, you slice it, and then because you can have it over many days because it just keeps so well. And we char grill it, and then we put lots of butter on it and honey, or it's actually really good with tahini as well. Tahini honey on banana bread is the best thing in the world.
But if you like bananas in a dessert context, then you should definitely try out the banana crepes in the dessert section that come with roasted with brown sugar, and then they come with a Barbados cream, which is made with yogurt and cream and rum. It's
so good.
Maybe better than banana bread.
Even better. Are you guys all right to just go on 5 more minutes because we lost those 5 minutes, or do you have? Is that okay? Good. Okay. Alison says we love the picture behind you both. Who is it by?
Oh,
I love that picture, Alison.
This is the heart. So this is a good friend of mine called Ivo Bisignano. He's an Italian artist, and he is such a multidisciplinary artist. He works with oil paints, with wood. He does video art. He's super. If you go back to if people go on my Instagram a few weeks ago, I posted a thing from his latest exhibition, which is pretty amazing.
He also designed the tableware.
Oh yeah,
Ottolenghi tableware with the big brush strokes, which are really beautiful.
Yeah.
Do you guys have you each have like a different favorite recipe for the book, or like a recipe that you would recommend for like an occasion, like say, I don't know, a dinner party or a Christmas, or is there something that stands out for you and it doesn't have to be the same one?
A dinner party or like a showstopper kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the turnip cake.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
The turnip cake it's not so hard to make.
It's not hard to make, no.
But it's really, really special, and also it looks great when you pour on the sauce, which is really beautifully brown and shiny with the soy and the mirin, and it's just
sesame oil.
It's just so vibrant. That's the one that I think is the kind of the holiday special.
Yeah, and that would go really well alongside the Brussels sprouts, which are in so they're charcoal Brussels sprouts, and they go in with a bath of lots and grapes and chestnuts that have been cooking in Shaoxing wine and soy sauce, and then you finish the whole thing off with pickled green chilies, and that will go really well with the turnip cake.
And it will transform your Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Krupa Ladva asked, what is the number one spice or flavour your kitchen is always stocked with?
Oh.
Just one. Let's take out salt and pepper.
Gosh, this is so hard. I mean, you talk about your dried chili, right?
Yeah, it's always about the dried chilies for me, and I think it wouldn't necessarily be one thing forever, but one thing of the moment, and my chili of the moment is habaneros. I just absolutely go crazy for dried habaneros, so I make habanero oil and habanero XO sauce, which goes on everything these days, so that's my spice of the moment.
I'm just always worried that I'm going to repeat what I've said so many times before, so it's difficult. So, I mean, I do think that cumin is and also good cumin seeds. They're just so different from the ground stuff that you get. Freshly toasted cumin, I think, is a really magical ingredient. It's so cross-cultural that you just find it in so many different cultures, from Morocco to the Middle East to India to South America, and it's just Yeah. It's Chinese. We've got Chinese recipes with the cumin. So yeah, absolutely, cumin.
Nice. Lastly, Johnny Vickers would like to know. Well, he says my man would like to know if you would both like to come round for tea.
Oh,
Any day.
There's an invitation. And thank you both so much and for staying on a little bit longer as well. It's been so much fun talking to you, and you've actually made me extremely, extremely hungry. And I'm a bit sad that I'm only having a tin of soup, tiny Vidalin. I hope that you guys all enjoyed it as well, and that we answered as many of your questions as we could and got to most things. And you've got something more delicious than a tin of soup for dinner. If you did enjoy this, then have a look at the Guardian site. They've got loads of other events coming up, including discussions around modern motherhood, ethical fashion, and an interview with legendary playwright Tom Stoppard. You can find out more on the Guardian Live section of the Guardian website. And finally, one last thing, straight after this event finishes, a very short, I promise, online survey will pop up on your screen. Please do fill it in if you can. Your feedback will help shape future events. And I'm really sorry about the technical thing earlier. I hope that didn't spoil anyone's evening. So yeah, thanks guys, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks,
Felicity.
Felicity.
Thank you.